Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. I am Khaldun Azhari, I'm the president of this club, and I have the honor to moderate this event today. It's about how Trump's presidency can impact Japan and the world. Let me first introduce our main speakers. At my very right, Professor Fumiaki Kubo, a Barton Hepburn Professor of American Government and History. To his right is also his graduates at the Graduate Schools of Law and Politics at University of Tokyo. To his right is Professor Toshihiro Nakayama. He's Professor, Faculty of Policy Management at Keio University. And to his right, Dr. Kumi Yokoe, she is Political Analyst. And I think she will start the presentation today. So this press event today comes at a very important time, just 4 days. 4 days before President-elect Trump is sworn in. And the world is watching what kind of politics he's going to adopt, and his rhetoric is going to be implemented in his policies, and especially toward Japan and Asia. Japan is concerned about his policy toward the American bases and host nation support, especially paying for the American bases in Japan, and also about the TPP, Trans-Pacific Trade negotiations that is under question now, and other issues, all of which will be discussed and talked about today by our analysts and speakers. And we would like to say that each of them will speak for about 15 minutes in English, and then that will be followed by questions and answers. And also, we would like to say that there will be some presentation here, so we all set to start a very good event. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please give our guest speakers a heartful and warm welcome. Thank you.
Okay, I can start. Thank you very much for having me here today. It is an honor for me to speak here. Today, I will speak on President-elect Trump's impact based on my experiences in the United States. For the reason he won would predict the direction of Trump policy. So I'm going to talk about why he won first. And I think my views are a bit different from Japanese media and even some views expressed by US media. As you may know, the Washington Post covered the release of my book last April, just before the election. In my book, I predicted that Trump will win the Republican primaries. And in terms of the general election, even if Hillary Clinton wins, Trumpism, I don't know how announce Trumpism would remain. My prediction was based on a generational theory, and even though Hillary would get more voters, Trump understood the current trend more than Clinton. And with that, there was at least a chance Trump would win. That's my statement in my book. Last summer, I returned to the US for 2 months to see if my general prediction and analysis work would apply to the general election. It was during the time I saw Trump as having a real chance of winning. And there are 3 reasons for this. I drove up and down the Rust Belt from Washington, D.C. to St. Paul's, Minnesota, to attend some academic annual meeting, because I'm going to be professor starting at April. So I wanted to know what is the trend of academics on the Trump phenomenon. So then I saw handmade signals all over the road, which were all in support of Trump. I cannot find any sign for Hillary on the Roosevelt. Another clue was when attended the annual meeting of journalists and mass communication. I heard from a number of academics in attendance that they recognized Trump would be much stronger than his initial polling. So they were afraid of Trump's phenomenon so much. And last but not least, this election was crucially important for Republicans. I think this is one of the biggest reasons, and also it reflects his direction of policy next 4 years. Least of all because this election would impact of the future power and selecting of a number of Supreme Justices. When I returned to Washington, D.C. from Roosevelt travel, I recognized a mood has shifted, and some of the top Republicans were now in support of Trump. I think because of Supreme Justices. In these last months, before the presidential election, I realized two truths that were unitarized toward Trump's benefit. This is last 2 months' phenomenon. First, this is his election strategy. Trump's rallies were specifically held in the Roosevelt, especially Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. States where Democrats had typically won. Of course, he rallied as well in swing states like Florida, but Hillary never rallied in Wisconsin. And second, from the middle of October, the price of health insurance was set to go up around 30%. I think it was 29%. This, of course, would be a huge blowback against the Democrats and Hillary. Upset working class people who would have voted for the Democrats would now turn to Trump. So after that, I returned to Tokyo in September, the end of September. And I told Japanese politicians, the media, and so on, that Trump has a chance of winning. Of course, Hillary had more chance, but I saw lots of some signal he can win. But most of them did not want to listen to my analysis. At the time, especially for those well established in politics, the government and the media, not only in Japan but also in US, they could not accept this very unfamiliar candidate with such a generally rude seeming leadership style. I said Trump had won the first TV debate in spite of the fact that Hillary typically seems to win during debate. But Trump was very good at mentioning each state's name that he wanted to win, and this would very much resonate with voters' emotions. He mentioned Pennsylvania and Michigan. Hillary never mentioned any states by name. So this is touchy for voters at the Roosevelt. So when I mentioned that on TV, some of them who don't relate it to politics say that, she is not expert on U.S., she is stupid or something like that. But I understood that is completely different standard from we were taught. So then, most Japanese couldn't even, of course, at that time, most Japanese almost, even Japanese couldn't even imagine Trump as having a chance to winning. Because Trump absolutely win, but at least he had some chance to win. And this thinking proved to be a big gap for those within Tokyo. It's proved to be a big gap for those in Washington as well. Here, I want to let you all know where I stand first, because when I say that President Obama has been enough strong to make change in America, Japanese people think, oh, you like Obama, you support Obama. So then I say that Trump has chance to win. Japanese people say that, oh, you like Trump, you support Trump because you are in Heritage Foundation as senior fellow. But during it doesn't matter for me. I'm Japanese. I'm not Republican. I'm not Democrats either. I'm researcher. So my point is, my view is for Japan, how to deal with America as a Japanese. So I don't endorse anybody. So now also, why Trump won is maybe sometimes I make irritation to Japanese people, but just he gonna be president. So we have to deal with him, what we can do to get something from him. This is my point. So I think that kind of should think about 6 months ago. I'm here is very surprisingly and fortunately. I never think I can speak here to talk about Trump and the U.S. politics. And I think now the birth of President Donald Trump may finally shatter the image that the Japanese have had of America. It has been changed. I feel so when I was in Heritage Foundation. I can say he is more of a successor of President Obama rather than a successor of President Reagan. A president during a time in which the U.S. was sort of world police against Soviet Union. I think this is imaging of America in Japan. President Reagan's legacy had worked for the Cold War and the post-Cold War era. However, America is now facing new situations such as those being created by ISIS. Before 9/11, the U.S. never expected that the U.S. homeland would be attacked. Foreign policy was international affairs. Now, foreign policy covers international affairs and homeland security. President Obama's previous statement that the United States is no longer the police of the world was a shock in Japan. Many in Japan seem to believe that America is still the police of the world, and President Obama's opinion on the matter was an exception. Many of Trump's statements during the election campaign were no doubt too extreme in parts, but his agreement, it's hard for me to find it. Sorry about that. Trump's statement during the campaign were no. But his agreement that America is no longer the police of the world shows a possible regression with the prevailing popular perceptions established under Obama, who understands that even the post-Cold War era was finished. A general consensus in the U.S. I never once heard that the U.S. is the policeman of the world for as long as I worked at the Heritage Foundation, even conservative think tank. However, Trump's biggest difference from President Obama may be in terms of national security with respect to its overseas commitments. Despite President Obama declaring that America is no longer the policeman of the world, President Obama still recognized America's role within the international community. But the Japanese had different view from it. For example, I watched the BBC News. BBC News reported that America's global influence had increased over the last 10 years. But even BBC noted that this may not be true everywhere standing. There is just one country that sees the American influence declining. While showing a picture of the map of Japan, their report showed it was only Japan as being disappointed President Obama statesman. Of course, another country are disappointed, but some different level. Many Japanese have believed America should be policeman. So the disappointed level is different from another countries. And I think another countries already, especially Europe, already accepted and recognized U.S. is no longer policeman. President-elect Trump will surely force Japan to recognize that President Obama's stance on the U.S. is no longer the world police. I just returned from another trip to Washington, D.C. yesterday. I happened to meet my former boss and founder of the Heritage Foundation, who is now a powerful member within the Trump transition team. He said to me, President-elect Trump understands Japan is an important ally, and with a new ambassador, the U.S.-Japan alliance will be stronger. The new ambassador, the name is, he said that Dr. Furner's really, really good friend. They talk in the conversation, always the new ambassador said Japan is very important for U.S. But I assume our strong relationship will be redefined under his administration. Trump may likely establish the U.S. as being much further from being the world police than under President Obama. And next is TPP. As for the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, which Trump had already declared dead on day one of his office. Some saw TPP as a response to the expanding economic influence of China. China is, of course, not an enemy to America. And even hawkish Republicans say China has never been our Cold War foe. TPP was never proposed as a counter to China in public. In fact, many forgot that the U.S. was not originator behind the TPP. However, it is obvious that TPP and other such FTAs are tools for national security for the U.S. I can see Japan still hopes the U.S. will remain in the TPP. But as long as I heard that from Heritage Foundation and another conservative circles, TPP is dying. And also, the Heritage Foundation has been an advocate of free trade since President Reagan. It has never publicly supported TPP. So I don't see any supporter for TPP in Washington, D.C. We must watch out for new definition of free trade that may arise under the Trump government. But even now, it is hard to predict the future of trade for America. That is the situation of American policy. Democrats and Republicans don't know which way it would go. So they are looking for how to redefine their own policy right now. Free trade is a trademark of conservatives and Republicans, even though it was President Obama who supported TPP. So direction has been different. To this point, President-elect Trump sounds almost anti-free trade Trump. Political philosophy is American first, which may mean less involvement in international affairs. This is the last page. On the other hand, President Obama's commitment to the world may be much bigger than President-elect Trump. So defining the idea of Democrats or Republicans has certainly been mixed by both President Obama and President-elect Trump. I recognized during my visit to DC last week that we can easily misunderstand the Trump administration if we keep to the old views held by political elite. Former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, talked at the Heritage Foundation 5 days ago on how to understand President-elect Trump and what's called Trumpism. He noted we have no way of measuring his policies because he has never been a politician and has never been in the circle of politics. Usually, we think Trump cannot do these things a politician or the other public officer. But according to Gingrich, Trump may find new methods to solve problems, as he always did for his business. When we talk to experts on the incoming Trump administration, those who are within the political elite and those too blind to outside opinion, they may give us their old views toward Trump's administration. So it's easy for us to misunderstand where Trump will go, even we talked a lot of American people. We need to figure out how to open the middle of these elites and get them to change their old ways. Even many Republicans are confused so much. For the next 4 years, I will certainly keep watching to see how President Trump ratifies the political philosophy of the Republican policy. Thank you very much.
Next speaker.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you so much for inviting me for this prestigious institution. This is really a tremendous honor for me. And thank you for giving us a really difficult topic. Mr. Trump is certainly entertaining. On this, I thank our American friends for electing him president. I hope our American friends here in this room will be given a permanent resident status if they wish to be here in Japan, whoever. Now on Trump. It is not easy to analyze him. We are never sure to what extent we take what he says or what he tweets, seriously. Though probably we all agree that we have to take him seriously. So I will first mention U.S. presidential election itself in my first part of my presentation. Then in the second part of my remark, I will touch on the U.S.-Japan relations. Just briefly on the U.S. presidential election last year, which is really exceptional, not only for Mr. Trump's lack of both political experience and the military service, but also because it was the first time since World War II that the Republican Party had nominated a presidential candidate with an isolationist disposition. Also, both the Republican and the Democratic candidates for the presidency pledged opposition to the TPP. And, it is also the first time for us to see both Democratic and Republican candidates to be, protectionist since 1945. The latter 2 points would seem to be especially important in regard to the consideration of the future direction of U.S. Politics. In overall terms, it would seem that elites in the United States, as well as in a number of European countries, including the UK, have seen a decline in their ability to influence the course taken by their respective countries. The success of Mr. Trump in overcoming opposition and resistance from his party's establishment during the contest to become the Republican Party's nominee would seem to be a manifestation of this phenomenon. Similarly, in the contest for the Democratic Party nomination, Hillary Clinton found herself in an unexpectedly difficult struggle with Senator Bernie Sanders, who was virtually unknown when he started his campaign. Among the policies or slogans that Mr. Trump put forward, the following trio or three things in a set stood out. First, anti-illegal immigrant stance, employing a fierce rhetoric. Second, anti-TPP, anti-NAFTA protectionism. Third, anti-internationalism that ventures to reduce the U.S. roles in relation to its allies. Mr. Trump's victories in states such as Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin would surely have been impossible without fervent support for these policies. In particular, the first two, anti-illegal immigrant stance and the protectionism from the white blue-collar demographic. There's a certain level of apprehension that future contests for the Republican presidential nomination will regularly see the ascent of Trump-like candidates because, he showed the fellow Republicans how to win the nomination, So it is feared that in this event, there will be a transformation in the Republican Party in the end, which has consistently adopted a fundamental stance in favor of upholding the international order based on the rule of law and has promoted the principle of free trade since 1945. Now, how do we deal with this new administration? This is really a big policy challenge as well as intellectual and philosophical challenge to Japan. In my view, the government of Japan should not quickly change or improvise anew its policy vis-à-vis the United States in response to this leadership change. A minority voice in Japan might support nuclear armament, blindly following the recommendation by Mr. Trump, or another minority voice could welcome the withdrawal of the U.S. base and the abolishment of the Japan-U.S. security arrangements. In my view, such arguments basically benefit Japan very little. To begin with, it is not the case that the U.S. public opinion has turned hostile to Japan. It is still, the public opinion still is supportive of internationalist foreign policies and of free trade. That such a feature is more conspicuous among the elites. Even in Mr. Trump's government, one could never be sure that all the political appointments, all 4,000 appointments, these people, political appointees, are in accord with President Trump's concrete policy proposals. What is more, there is a possibility that the policy orientation of the presidency could change in a short time, or a possibility that internationalist free trade proponent government could be resurrected in a short while. As discussed above, the possibility that the U.S. Should change in the long term can neither be denied. In this respect, what we need is the kind of thinking that goes back to the basics of foreign and security policies. And what is at the basis of such thinking? Of course, it is the evaluation of the threats to Japan and the decision on whether response against such threats is adequate for Japan acting on its own. The security environment surrounding Japan is very severe by all means, as you know, and it's never easy for Japan to deal with it on its own. It would therefore be vital for Japan to firmly uphold the policy line based on the US-Japan alliance and to further strengthen the alliance to improve its security environment. Faced with the emergence of U.S. President who has made remarks pointing to a policy to Japan different from those of his predecessors, Japan could be required to search for security undertakings stepped up further than before. In other words, Japan ought to start putting into action whatever it can on its own. Probably our message is that we would still like to trust the United States, but uncertainty increases. And talking about U.S.-Japan relations a little bit further, there's an interesting question. To what extent we should be worried about Mr. Trump? It is not appropriate to worry too much about Mr. Trump, but it is not appropriate either not to worry at all about it. There are some precedents in U.S.-Japan relations. In 1980, when Mr. Reagan got elected, many people, including the Americans and Japanese, were worried that he might be too hawkish, but it turned out that he was not so dangerous. In 1968, when Mr. Nixon was elected, the Japanese government did not worry too much, but it should have, in retrospect, given what he did with China or currency. In 1992, when Bill Clinton won the White House, Japan did not expect him to initiate a very nasty trade war. So, there are precedents. So we have to go in between. Excuse me. Then what to worry about Mr. Trump? First, he doesn't know or care about the facts or policy details regarding the U.S.-Japan relations. He very probably doesn't know that Japan pays 75% of the cost of the military bases for U.S. troops, that the rights that the U.S. get in Article 6 of the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty is really indispensable and important for the United States, in the sense that the United States can use military bases in Japan, not just to defend Japan, but dispatch troops to the Korean Peninsula, to the Taiwan Strait, or to the South China Sea. That the Japanese companies are creating about 900,000 jobs in the United States, and that Japan now can fight alongside with the United States in order to defend the United States under certain conditions, when certain conditions are met under the new national security legislation of 2015. Second, it seems that he regards the international politics as a deal-making, as transaction or bargaining. He rarely speaks about the principles or shared strategic goals or values or principles. For example, has he ever talked about human rights problems in China? I haven't heard him speak about that. So it seems that the world, as he looks at it, seems to be consisting of one dimension, which is trade, or making money, or losing money, or which side is getting more money. At the press conference last week, he lumped together Japan, China, Russia, and Mexico. People should wonder what these four countries have in common in the context of trade relations, coupled with with no updated knowledge. It seems that Mr. Trump regards Japan as a potentially hostile nation rather than an ally. We have to see. Third, the way he makes decisions is also a bit scary. It seems that he does that based on intuition or short time or even instantaneous calculations without lengthy process of deliberations involving experts, which might be the case of his telephone conversation with the Taiwanese president. At least he should, definitely consult with allies whenever he makes a significant policy change, that affects these allies. Fourth, most seriously, it seems that he doesn't know what he doesn't know. I'm hopeful that I am worried about him too much, but he doesn't seem to spend enough time to learn policy details that are crucially important. And fifth, for all these reasons, the summit meeting between Mr. Abe and Mr. Trump has a paramount importance. Mr. Trump will have to spend at least an hour or two with Mr. Abe and listen to him and think about Japan for an hour or two. And Prime Minister Abe will get a very good, rare opportunity to teach the basics of the alliance mechanism. In closing, I mentioned two points that we should be observing on alert in the coming first few months of the Trump presidency. In the context of U.S.-Japan relations, it is imperative for the new president to state in public clearly that he will apply Article 5 of the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty to the Senkaku Islands. Otherwise, we will see only escalation of the provocation on the Chinese side. It is also essential that Mr. Trump says that he will continue the operation of freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. In fact, probably he will have to upgrade the operation. And what should Japan do on concrete terms? I will mention just one thing. As I said, it would be smart and needed for Japan to try to do a lot more for its own self-defense. And one example might be the defense spending. Probably it should spend more for its own self-defense. Right now, as you know, it is spending less than 1% of its GDP for defense, whereas Germany or even New Zealand, which looks as a paradise in terms of the national security threat, are spending 1.2% for its defense. This is just one defense, but Japan has to think about what it can do for its own defense. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Toshihiro Nakayama. It's nice to be back, in fact. I used to come here in the early 90s when I was working at the Far Eastern Bureau of Washington Post. I was a young special correspondent, writing a couple of articles on Japan. So I never imagined then that I would be up here as a speaker. That was almost close to 30 years ago, I guess. I guess I am the most pessimistic of the three. Don't read too much into the fact that I'm wearing a black tie. It's not a symbol of anything. But I am worried, I guess. But after hearing, Dr. Yokoe and Professor Kubo's soothing analysis that we shouldn't overreact. I became a bit optimistic, but still I'm a bit worried. And I guess the the characteristic of United States under Mr. Trump would be radical uncertainty. And this is going to be the essence for the Trump presidency, I would assume. And predictability is going to be a very scarce resource. And I guess this will be the norm to a certain degree. And we were always talking about U.S. becoming a geopolitical uncertainty during the election. But this was half joking, provoking the Americans to tell them that we were worried. Because although there were ups and downs in American commitment to this region and American internationalism, I guess we took American internationalism too much for granted, now that Mr. Trump has won. It has always been, at least after World War II, the bedrock of international order. And I would say that Japan was the country that benefited from this existence of this world order the most. And we were, and I was, totally aware of the energy and sort of frustration that motivated the Trump phenomena. I was in West Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania myself, talking to the Trump supporters, the Trumpists, and sort of understood why people could not accept Mr. Obama or Mrs. Clinton as their president. But I never thought that he would, unlike Dr. Yokoe, I never thought he would become the president. And I was always saying during the election that Mr. Trump, would probably lose, but we have to be aware that there exists a strong tendency to pull back. And there is this Trump phenomena, although Mr. Trump may not win the White House. And that was the argument that I was making. So the statement that U.S. may be becoming a geopolitical certainty was sort of a rhetorical question in light of Mr. Trump and the Trump phenomena's rise. But it turns out it became a reality, and for Japan, I think it sort of poses us with a bit of an overreaction maybe, but an existential question for Japan, I would say. I guess there's irony here, because as many of the alliance handlers, some call it, alliance mafias, people who deals with the alliance, they say that, the state of the U.S.-Japan alliance has never been better. It progressed dramatically under Mr. Abe and Mr. Obama's leadership. And I do agree with the statement. At a policy level, there's sort of a synchronicity, a political level, although, there's no affinity you saw between George W. And Koizumi or Nakasone and President Reagan. There seems to be a trust between the two leaders today. And also there's this symbolic visit by President Obama to Hiroshima, and also Prime Minister Abe's visit to Pearl Harbor. So at a policy level, and a political level, and a symbolic level, I think we are, and U.S.-Japan alliance and the relations are at a pretty good condition, I would say. And we assumed that, because Hillary would win, and we were repeatedly assured by the American friends that she would win, and that we can expect continuity in the management of this alliance. And maybe it would be even better under Mrs. Clinton, because she just had the right mix, right? Not too soft and detached like President Obama, and not too unilateral and interventionist as President George W. Bush. So for us, Mrs. Clinton had, I think, the right mix, just the right mix. But in reality, we are going to face in a couple of days a president who represents nothing of a foreign policy establishment view of the world and this region. And we all know, and Dr. Yokoe and Professor has touched upon it, but has said lots of colorful things about Japan. Yes, there's people like Mr. Tillerson, John Mattis, who maybe we can trust, who the foreign policy establishment supports. But then again, you have people like Mr. Flynn, Professor Nabarro, and Alexander Gray, and of course, the president himself. So, I guess U.S.-Japan alliance faced a difficult condition in the 1990s, the earlier part of the 1990s, because the Cold War was over, we lost a common enemy, and during the Cold War, the whole purpose of the alliance was to counter the aggression from the North by the Soviet Union. But that aggression was gone. So people were sort of trying to redefine the role and the mission of the alliance. And there were books like Alliance Adrift by Dr. Funabashi. He has written very eloquently about the loss of direction of the alliance. But in the late 1990s, U.S. and Japan, the alliance handlers, came together with this new narrative that would justify the alliance. This alliance has to continue. The reason is that this alliance is not just to counter the threats. It's more about two countries which share values. And these countries would uphold a desirable international order in this region, which would of course benefit the US, which would of course benefit Japan, but which would of course benefit the region as well. That was the narrative that both sides created. And of course there's a fundamental and a structural asymmetry in the formation of the alliance. That's for sure. But when we sort of define alliance in terms of two countries which share values, upholding a desirable regional order, it sort of becomes an alliance of co-equals, right? The narrative becomes that. Although, the actual commitment we take and the actual things we do might differ, in spirit, it becomes an alliance of co-equals. And I think that has been quite successful. A narrative in trying to sort of deepen and refine the alliance. But what Mr. Trump has done is that he has almost totally undermined this whole concept of value-based alliance. And that worries us a lot. And in Japan, I don't want to sort of overhype this, but in Japan, and I would say that Japan is basically a very pro-American country. One of the most, maybe Philippines is higher. More than 90% of the people like the United States. We don't go that high, but we're close. Right? We're a very pro-American country. But at the same time, because of our reliance on the U.S., there's a certain degree of uncomfortableness, uneasiness about relying on the U.S. So I would say that this is an undercurrent of uncomfortableness about our reliance on the U.S. And during this summer, or last summer, there was a mega hit movie, and I'm sure many of you saw this Shin Godzilla. I guess that was a description of Japanese uncomfortableness. It's not anti-Americanism. I'm not going that far. But uncomfortableness about relying on the U.S. too much. So Mr. Trump might have sort of stimulated that uncomfortableness in Japan. I don't know how that would turn out politically. But this fundamental sort of question that we're posed, that we have no choice but to rely on the U.S. no matter who the president is. That's the existential position that we found out during this election. Right? And a country is not just a set of rules or policies. It's the source of identity. It's sort of like who you are. And we're posed with this situation that at a fundamental level, we have no choice. And I think that is a serious position that we always knew this. But Mr. Trump, in a strange way, showed us this existential condition. Having said all this, I think it still remains true that for Japan, choosing U.S. is the best choice. So what we have to do is to convince the Trump team that for you as well, Japan is the best choice. And in order for America to maintain, and this is a question, maybe Mr. Trump doesn't maintain the position that America is enjoying today. Who knows? But if you want to maintain the position that you're in, you would have to be committed to Asia Pacific. And if you want to be committed to the Asia Pacific, it's not only Japan, there's many other partners, but Japan would be the best partner. And it's a good choice for you, it's good choice for Japan, and it's good choice for the region as well. So we would have to be aggressively trying to convince the Trump administration that U.S.-Japan important is not only important for Japan, but important for the United States as well. And lastly, what I worried about most is the sort of the negative Trump hype in Japan. And you already see that. When the TV is reporting about sort of a General Mattis's confirmation hearing, all you hear is about that he's a mad dog, full stop. And you don't go further into his policy. And that's kind of the environment. I think that would enhance as Mr. Trump takes office. But we have to cool down, actually evaluate his policies rather than reacting to his tweet, acting to his, his wild, speeches. So I would say that, the most danger in trying to cope with Mr. Trump may not be coming from the U.S. Maybe it might be coming from us overreacting to small, tiny events. So we have to calm down and try to evaluate Mr. Trump at a policy level. I would end at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your insights. We would like to open the floor for your questions. Please raise your hand. We start with journalist first. You proceed to the front mic and ask first question. I would like, yes.
Isabel Reynolds from Bloomberg. Obviously, I'm still going on kind of very uncertain ground here, but in Rex Tillerson's hearing the other day, he talked about blocking China from reaching its artificial islands in the South China Sea. If this in any form turns out to be a real policy, how would Japan have to react, do you think?
You address your question?
Sorry?
To whom you address it?
One thing we worry about, among Mr. Trump's policy is, of course, his attitudes towards China. Because for us, dealing with uncertain rise of China is the biggest issue. So there's two radical sort of opposites, I guess. Some people talk about Mr. Trump sort of achieving a grand bargain with China. It's sort of like the G2 argument. But also at the radical opposite, he may be very sort of hawkish against China. And you see that element's already there. Particularly on trade, but like the comment that you mentioned by Mr. Tillerson. And of course, his tweet and his call with President Tsai of Taiwan, that he might radically change U.S. position to China. And Japan necessarily do not want that situation, I guess. We don't want sort of a Trump administration cozying up too closely with China, but we don't want sort of U.S.-China crashing on critical elements. We do want U.S. to stay firm on sort of maritime order issues on East China Sea and South China Sea. But we don't want China and U.S. crashing. So I guess we have to wait and see, and expect the sort of the foreign policy establishment to take hold and sit in the driver's seat. So that's as far as I can say, I guess.
Yes.
As far as I listened to Chirason's statement at the confirmation hearings, his statements on the East China Sea and South China Sea were pretty reassuring. But, at the end of the day, we are not sure which view, Mr. Trump's view or Tillerson's view would prevail. And, even if there's a lengthy deliberation at the State Department or even at the NSC, all of these might be overturned by just one Twitter at 3 o'clock in the morning. And so, until the last moment, we couldn't be reassured, which in the end would be official U.S. government policy. And then, related to what Mr. Nakayama said, what I'm concerned about Mr. Trump's world outlook is that he might bargain unthinkables, trade things with national security stuff. He might get some token concession from China on trade, but he might give something very important, serious on security things, Taiwan's status or U.S. influence in the East China Sea. So that's our concern.
I heard that the Tillerson and Mattis are very intellectual. When I was in Heritage Foundation, we can trust what they are doing. I don't know, we can trust or not, but anyway, people who know them, they say that. And also, I think Mr. Trump, President-elect Trump met Prime Minister Abe at first. It was a big sign for China. So Japan is the very important country among Asia as well as in world. So, and also, when I read his tweet and his acting toward Taiwan, he talked with President Taiwan directly, and also he mentioned President Taiwan in tweet. I'm sure he had big briefing by Republican, not only one, the different variety opinion. Then he decided to talk with President Che. But so he decided to change some standard, or he want to break some international taboo. But he doesn't want to change one China policy. He wants to accept China policy. But, and also he wants to fight against China in trade, because he believes China killed a lot of jobs in US. But not only President-elect Trump, but also all of Republican, maybe all of American, just Professor Nakayama and Professor Kubo mentioned, America don't want to clash with China directly. So I think his transition team, not only transitionship, already the political appointment showed that Trump government will not crush China. So, and also don't use military a lot, but want to use military toward ISIS to protect their own homeland. But Tillerson come from energy, and another top political appointed people related to international affairs and trade belong to military or investors, bankers. Then I think about why he met Prime Minister first. And also he wanted to give some advantage to Taiwan. maybe two of this country will be this are good. Of course, we had have good relationship with our partner of U.S. and also we gonna be good customer. Usually, U.S. haven't want to sell military or energy, some high technology product to non-alliance company. Always, and also the Taiwan, Japan, and other many European companies want to be sold such a high technology. So I think Trump would be more salesman and also use alliance, especially use alliance. This is my view. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm gonna.
You can later on.
Yeah.
Linda Sieg from Reuters. I wonder to all three of you, in this situation of such uncertainty about what the Trump administration's international policies, including towards Japan, will be, if the Prime Minister does manage to meet Mr. Trump, then President Trump, as early as he wants to by the end of the month, what can Prime Minister Abe actually achieve, or at least what should he try to achieve in such a meeting? Thank you.
Well, probably Mr. Abe wants Mr. Trump to recognize that Japan is actually a good ally for the United States, not a hostile, country, on trade. And as I said, the United States is getting a lot of benefits from our bilateral relations on trade, on the jobs, and on national security items. And most important, Prime Minister Abe want to, get some commitments, clear commitments on the Senkaku Islands, to take over the officially published U.S. responsibility to apply Article 5 to these islands, which was announced in April of 2014 by Mr. Obama. Otherwise, it might mean that the United States officially retracted that commitment. So then might invite serious crisis, in that region.
Besides, the basic sort of policy, on the alliance and on the matters that is of interest to us, I think Mr. Trump's worldview is, I would portray it as like the Godfather view of international politics. He is interested in who's the boss in a certain country. Like when he's talking about Russia, he has Mr. Putin in mind, and of course when he's talking about China, he has Mr. Xi Jinping in mind, and he sees whether whether this leader is strong or not. And I think it's important for Mr. Abe to convince Mr. Trump that he is a strong leader with a strong support from the Japanese people, and that you can you can sort of do business with him. I think that's the impression that Mr. Abe would try to give Mr. Trump, and I think that will be the basis of U.S.-Japan alliance or the U.S.-Japan relations, and he would surely try to invite Mr. Trump to this region. And of course, try to convince him that you have to visit Japan first, because Japan is the most important partner in the region. And I think that's the message he will try to convey to Mr. Trump.
And I want to say to Prime Minister Abe, he's a businessman rather than politician. So think about business law in politics. So usually we want to say a lot. We want to get negotiation in politics. We want to say more and more. But in business law, don't say a lot at first. listen at first. Trump is one-man company owner president. In this case, I think he adopted this way more. So first, listen to him and what he says. Then he can say something. Don't give a lot at the first. I think this is good. This is my advice to Prime Minister Abe.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, this one, and this one, and this one, and this one.
Walter Sim from the Straits Times of Singapore. Thank you for the very comprehensive presentation. My question goes out to anyone on the panel who would like to answer it. Picking up on the point about the commitment to Asia Pacific that was made briefly earlier, to what extent do you see the outcomes of Prime Minister Abe's current diplomacy drive to 4 countries over 6 days, Philippines, Australia, Indonesia, and Vietnam, as part of this display to the Trump administration that Japan is really the best partner in the region? Thank you.
As to what Mr. Trump is saying about Japan, after the election, he hasn't been mentioning Japan in a negative context, right? So we're a bit relieved by that. But at the same time, if you see Mr. Trump's approach toward Asia Pacific and this region, there's a big uncertainty. And that would be clear if you compare this with Mr. Obama's policy toward Asia Pacific, which was called the pivot or the rebalance. And pivot or the rebalance was a policy to see the region as a whole, not deal with each sort of country or each issues, but try to come out with a comprehensive policy. There's questions whether that succeeded or not. But still, that was the attitude. And the reason why U.S.-Japan alliance was improved under Prime Minister Abe and President Obama was because U.S. had a sort of Asia policy, and it fitted very nicely within that context. But Mr. Trump, I think, lacks an Asia policy. Yes, if you ask, the Trump people, they would definitely say that Asia-Pacific is critically important. They would say that, no doubt. But they do not have a regional policy, and they do not have a U.S.-Japan alliance policy, which would resonate and fit in well with, the Asia-Pacific policy. So that's the element that I worry most, because Asia-Pacific is a very dynamic region. You can't deal with the issues country by country. You have to have a regional and a multilateral sort of coordinated policy. But as of now, maybe he would be having some sort of policy. But as of now, we see an absence of that. So that worries me to a certain degree.
Based on the remarks made by Mr. Trump, and also some of the appointments, thus far, there are indications that there might be some strong preoccupation in this administration with Middle East or Syria, and Mr. Trump said again and again that we will defeat ISIS during the campaign. So, our concern is probably, is that the United States might preoccupy itself too much in the Middle East area, including the Afghanistan, and, spend less resources than needed for Asia Pacific region. And my guess is that we'll hear less often about the rebalance to Asia or similar, slogans, if they have some slogans, And also, Mr. Trump's overall world outlook might be really balanced, embracing the threats in the Middle East and the threats in the Asia-Pacific region. He is, kind of whether he has a comprehensive understanding of these other risks or threats. We are not sure about that yet. So, this is what I feel right now.
I think Prime Minister Abe can and should take role in Asia more, especially for international business. Some Asian countries need some help from already developed country. So President-elect Trump decided not to take part of TPP. So in this case, some countries in Asia need some leader to make more international business in Asia. So I think Prime Minister Abe can do and should do more in this situation.
Thank you, panel, for an interesting discussion. I'm Roy Lockheimer, a long-time resident of Japan and a member of this club since the 1960s, and I probably look that way. I also am, although I lived in Japan for most of my adult life, I was born in New York, and I have a feeling of some simpatico with Donald Trump, since we both come from the same area. I'm a little bit older than he is. I ask a question to the panel based on sources. Here, located in Japan, I found it impossible to do research on the election campaign recently. So I traveled to the United States a couple of times and found overwhelming new sources which are not available in Japan at all. If you're looking at the Washington Post and the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, you're only getting one hard-bitten point of view. You have to look at other sources. Like, for one, might be Fox. Another one, what you're doing now in Japan is reading the Asahi and saying that's all Japan. It's a little bit different. So I think that the treatment of Trump is a little bit unbalanced in Japan, unfortunately. He is basically pro-Japan. And yet you can see the very warm welcome that he gave to Prime Minister Abe in November, with his whole family in his very pleasant residence in Trump Tower in New York. I think that should be a good sign. However, he remembers things. A New Yorker has a sense of humor that's based on sarcasm. And he remembers, for example, he's in the steak and mineral water business, among many other things, just a small item. But he gave a speech somewhere during the summer, which he said that his steaks are faced with 37% tariff by the Japanese government, and that this really irritated him from the treatment. He didn't think it was fair treatment from a good friend. So that basically, one point of history, this club in 1969 supported a trip to Formosa for all the working reporters. It was called Formosa then, rather than Taiwan, which is seen as a Japanese military term. The nationalist government of China based on Taiwan. It was a very interesting trip. I went on it, and we had a chance to meet Chiang Kai-shek. Summing up, I would just say that someone mentioned that Trump had no military experience. He never was a soldier, but he did go to military academy as a high school student for several years and had retained an interest in the military, particularly veterans associations, for many, many years.
What's your question, please?
My question is sources. I said it at the beginning. What are your sources? Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Anybody?
Well, I try to watch news, the TV news programs other than CNN. I went to New Hampshire. I really like Fox TV, and I use a lot of internet sources. So but it's not the Japanese media, but also U.S. media that was biased against Mr. Trump. And also I thought that there would be a chance of Mr. Trump getting elected, like the probability would be 30 or 40%. So that was a little bit higher than most Japanese experts had predicted.
It's not really about my sources, but I guess I trust my basic instincts to a certain degree. Because I was a hunter in South Dakota in a Reagan Democrat family, and a very religious one. And I think maybe I may be the only hunter, among the American specialists in Japan. I don't know, but I sort of understand the American heartland sort of feeling. And I did mingle with Trump supporters in Ohio. They're in their late 40s, 50s, and early 60s. Their image of America being great again is not really about, America really being strong or anything. It's about when they were young. Back in the 70s. Back in the 70s, America was in a very dire situation. But for them, their life was still okay. So when you talk with them about, for instance, Terry Bradshaw, Pittsburgh Steelers, that quarterback, that throw-in Super Bowl of 1976 something, you would immediately sort of snap with them and get into their world. So that's how I sort of went into them, talked with them. So like I said, I think I understood the energy behind the Trump movement. But by instincts, I'm talking about that. But besides that, everybody in Japan, at least if you are focusing on the United States, at least at a in the internet level, you can get all the things immediately as the American watchers are. You see the Twitter, you see the Breitbart, Fox News, and everything. So I would say no one in Japan who focuses on American politics just reads New York Times or Washington Post. Although I respect it and I read it, that's not the only source. I think the source is very diversified even in Japan. So I have a bit of a frustration following the Japanese news media, almost sort of like exclusively following New York Times and Washington Post. We try to infuse that, but sometimes in vain, I guess. Thank you.
Yeah, I cannot say all of my sources because I met, of course, Washington D.C. experts, and also my host family in Arkansas, desert county. So I could hear from that family about so conservative thinking. And also I was cooking teacher in Washington, D.C., so I can make conversation from younger to older without any affiliation. And also, I don't know why, but many American people want to share their love story for me. When they broke up their love, they came to me to talk more and more. So,
Trump?
yeah, so in this case, in that story, I hear from what they think very much on Trump too. My friend who belonged to Capitol and Republican side, Democrat side, but they gave me their private story before. This time also, just always say that between two of us, between you and me. So they gave me a lot of hidden story to me. So it's especially my skill of cooking helped so much, and also sharing such a love. Coach, how do you say that? The listener of love story helped so much to understand Trump's behind. Thank you.
Yes, and you.
'Siegfried Knidl, freelancer from Germany. It's not the main problem for the winning of Mr. Trump that America is overstretched its capabilities in the last decades. So American people feel their country is a declining country because they did too much for the other world. But Mr. Trump wants to say, America first. But this is not a solution. America has a lot of obligation in the world. It cannot retreat from all this obligation. But how to deal with, reduce the obligation, and fulfill it's many obligations it has in the world. Because if you think about, if Japan, U.S. would retreat from the Asian Pacific area, I think it would be an arms race would be follow in arms race, and the same perhaps in the Middle East, an arms race would follow. And so it's very difficult for the U.S. to retreat from their obligation, but on the other side they have to retreat a little bit. So what your solutions for?
Oh, this is a very difficult question. I do not see any instant solution. Mr. Trump's plan would be increase U.S. military, dramatically, but we are not sure where Mr. Trump will put these actually tanks or submarines or ships. So I don't know, but I can, answer your question very different way. I looked at the southern Ohio, like Scioto County, bordering with the state of Kentucky, where the most of the residents are white, blue-collar people, and half of them men don't have a job right now. And normal Republican candidates got about 49 to 52% since 2000 to 2012 presidential election, but Mr. Trump got 67% in these counties. So for the residents, in these counties, the international obligations, commitments, arms race didn't make sense, and they just wanted to change their lives. They are very desperate. So, I think, Mr. Trump's the rhetoric, especially anti-immigrant and anti-free trade, worked really well with these, blue-collar voters.
Your argument about this mood of retrenchment in the United States, I think that's deep, that's genuine. And in a very intellectual way, I think Mr. Obama tried to deal that situation as well. And his, in fact, idea of rebalance is not just his Asia-Pacific policy. It was about admitting that U.S. primacy doesn't solve anything anymore. U.S. cannot do everything around the world. Therefore, you have to prioritize. Where is the important region? It's Asia-Pacific. Therefore, you pivot and rebalance toward Asia-Pacific. So in a strange way, I think Dr. Yokoe sort of touched upon a bit, but there's a continuation between Mr. Obama and Mr. Trump, although their instincts are totally different and opposite. Right? And I don't have a solution to that. But I think we're too much hyped up about American decline. America would remain strong for some time to come, I think, comparatively speaking to others. So the sole purpose, I think, for Japan, the most important thing is not to deal with China's uncertain rise and crisis in Korean Peninsula. It is important, of course. But much more important than that is that we have to convince the Americans to stay committed in this region. Because since the beginning of the 20th century, although U.S. is not geographically part of this region, you have a big ocean between us. But U.S. has, in a functional way, an integral part of Asia, East Asia. Economically, politically, militarily, U.S. is an Asian country in that respect. So we have to convince, it's a dire task, it's very difficult, but we have to somehow try to convince the people in the heartland, people who supported Mr. Trump, that America cannot become isolated. You have to be committed. And that's the role that we expect from a U.S. president, trying to convince the American people the difficult task that U.S. has to accept. But we don't see that in Mr. Trump. Therefore, we are very worried. But somehow, I mean, I'm not answering to you. I'm saying that I don't know how to do it. But that's the most important thing for Japan. Try to convince Americans that you have to be committed in this region. And just don't try to hype up the theory of American decline, although I do admit that it is in a relative decline. So.
Yeah, I'm afraid that America is, and also America will be. Trump administration is not exception anymore. Just as long as I see, only senator who elected at Cold War during Cold War speak on how much American role in international affairs is important. But congressmen who elected in post-war era and also 21st century, they don't so much take care of international affairs. So I'm afraid America will be such a just don't want to take obligation like they have, like it have had.
Hi, I'm Teddy Jimbo with the Video News. Since we have three most distinguished American politics experts, so I really have to ask this question. As a journalist, I have a habit of preparing for the worst possible scenario, okay? And I like to kind of capitalize on the Professor Nakayama's radical uncertainty theory, okay? Is there any sort of a fail-safe mechanism in U.S. politics in case president does something really outrageous, maybe even stupid? I understand that the president does have almost a solo authority when it comes to the trade and foreign policy. So we never know, in that radical, uncertain world, we never know what's going to happen. And is there any fail-safe mechanism in the U.S. And I don't think impeachment can be the answer, because I don't think you can impeach president just over the policy differences. So if Trump, the President-elect Trump, that's something which no one can understand, is it actually going to take place, or there's something that the world or the United States, Congress, people, media can do? I hope you have some answers. Thank you.
Well, it's not our job to remove him from office. It's up to Americans. It has to go through the impeachment mechanism. It might be possible, under certain conditions, but it's not easy. It's different from no confidence vote in the parliamentary system. You have to find him guilty, of major crimes, against Constitution. For us, the worst case scenario might be for him to, make a kind of agreement, trade agreement with China, on trade, as I said, China making the token concession to the United States on trade, while the United States, Mr. Trump, saying that, to China that you can do whatever you like to do in the East China Sea or South China Sea. We are leaving this area. This might be the most kind of outrageous and, the most, undesirable, scenario.
Thank you, Mr. Jimbo. I think you're right that impeachment is extremely difficult. Mr. Trump has to engage in some unlawful matter to start the impeachment process. Unless he does that, just like Professor Kubo said, just that he's done terrible things doesn't justify impeachment, and that would destabilize the democracy. So I don't think it's a good thing. So there's, my answer would be very mundane. There would be a balance of power, separation of powers. The media would play an extremely important role, I would assume. You saw the first press conference. I was a bit. I wasn't satisfied because the other reporters should have given CNN, John Acosta, a chance to question Mr. Trump. They were so eager to question Trump himself that they didn't do that. But I think they should have done that. And there was some precedents in Japan. Prime Minister Sato Eisaku, he had some difficulty with the press, but the press altogether sort of protested in support of a certain media organization. So maybe you would see something like that in the coming press conference. You hear this rumors that the Trump administration might fundamentally change its relationship with the White House press corps. So the media has an important role as well. And the people, of course, they would have an important role. But my worry is that if it becomes sort of like an anti-Trump movement, I don't think it's going to be constructive. You have to disagree him on policy, not just saying that I'm not for Mr. Trump. He's not my president. That's not how things work in a democracy. He was elected by election. There's some disputes about the results, but he's the president. So you have to deal with him. You engage with him on policy matters. So I think that's the role of the people. So the danger is that the people's movement would become an anti-Trump movement, and that would, I think, vice versa, or ironically, strengthen the Trump phenomenon. So I don't think American people. I would tell those people that grow up, accept the Trump presidency, but oppose him on policy, and maybe support sometimes. So that would be my answer. Thank you.
I agree with both of them, and also two more. U.S. will not clash with China and any country directly, but Trump can make uncertain, like they said before. So in this case, some small clashes happened in Asia, in Europe, in Middle East, I don't know. But I worry about such a small clashes outside of U.S. And another one is when Vice President Pence quit Vice President, at that time it is in really fear, because now I think that Vice President Pence, of course, cannot control Trump everything, but can be gate for elite and Washington experts in Washington D.C. But he quit. The gate will shut down. So I think that Pence quit. At that time, I don't know what's going on. I think this is one of the scenario to start worst, something worst.
Thank you. Yes, Ambassador. I give one more question.
I'm Khalil, Ambassador of Bahrain. Thank you very much for being here. My question to Professor Nakayama. Cool and evaluate. Reagan came with policies which really developed the private sector by privatization, regulation, and so on and so on. And now we have very efficient, innovative, global companies. Now we are coming back to government. Over the last 4 decades, government are aging, inefficient, not creative. They are not using properly technology. My question is, when Trump been elected, there was a book recently, The Fourth Revolution, written by the former editors of the Economics magazine. And it talked about reinventing government, how to make a government efficient, innovative, profitable, and smart. My question is here, do you think this era is trying to push for more efficient, effective, smart government? Thank you, sir.
You're asking particularly about the United States or more in general?
I'm asking about everywhere.
Everywhere. Well, we hope the government could function very efficiently. But I think the trend and the people see it is in a totally opposite direction. Therefore, you see the rise of populism around the world. And this populism is rooted in the fact that, you don't trust the people in government and bureaucracies. And you can't change those people in power, those people who's responsible, by sort of election processes or by a traditional way of sending messages. That you have to have a radical reformation of government, of politics. And so if you sort of highlight that fact, I think at least the perception among the people is that government is totally inefficient and it should be kicked out. And is the government providing a new alternative, a convincing answer to these frustrations? I don't really think so. So there is a need to fill that vacuum for sure. But I don't necessarily see that. If there is one, we could have prevented Mr. Trump, I think. But the fact that Mr. Trump will be in the White House in a couple of days symbolizes the fact that efficient government is not at least on the horizon as of now, I think. Does that answer your question?
No, but can I? My question is not what's going to happen. What are the people are dreaming for? This is the question.
Well, I guess people are now focused on getting rid rather than trying to build up. And that's what you see in UK, in the US. There's a couple of elections coming up in Europe this year. So I think we're in a destruction phase right now, rather than filling the vacuum.
Can you ask very short question, please? Very short. That's the last question.
Thank you very much. I'm Takeshi Hara, a member of the club. I'd like to. My question is, to Professor Nakayama about the following. The following, by following, I mean, I see a huge, almost diametrically different difference in policies or political views between those Mr. Trump designated candidates for each ministry and Mr. Trump. And my intent of this question is that I hate to say this, but even if Mr. Trump is erratic or ignorant or irregular in some area other than business, so long as there is a capable and conscientious, legitimate minister remain in the Trump's administration, America will not derailed or deviated from the conventional political or economic road. So I'd like to invite Professor Nakayama's comments or replies. Thank you.
Well, I think you're totally right. That if people like General Mattis and Homeland Security designate Secretary Kerry and Tillerson, all those sort of establishment figures, we may have some difference in views on certain policy, but they're in a foreign policy establishment. And as long as they take hold and they're allowed to formulate a policy, I think you can see a certain degree of continuity. So I hope that would become reality. It's my sincere hope, because I don't want Mr. Trump to fail. I want him to succeed. That's good for Japan. I guess that's good for the U.S. and that's good for the world. But what I worry is at a bit of a lower level. You need to fill in the deputy secretaries, the assistant secretaries, and all that. And Mr. Trump's transition team has the basic stance of Mr. Trump's transition team is that which side were you on during the election? And if you were on the other side, we don't want you in. So I think that's how the Trump administration would start. Maybe it would turn differently in a year to come because they have to fill in with pragmatists. But I'm a bit worried how it would start. So the first maybe 6 months of the Trump presidency, most of the important posts are not filled. There could be some contingencies, emergencies, how U.S. would react. Would U.S. be able to react? That's the worry I have. And I'm sure both my colleagues on both sides have a view on this point as well.
All right. Thank you. I think this wraps up our event today. Thank you very much for coming and giving us great insights. I would like to give you 1 year honorary membership as a token gift for your coming. Please come to our club within this year and tell us more about Trump and his great achievements. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming today and have a nice evening.